To understand Donald Barr's Space Relations, we have to analyze it on two intersecting tracks: the macro-political structures governing an empire and the micro-behavioral psychology of a single man breaking under pressure. The planetary Federal Republic of Earth faces a severe geopolitical threat. The Plith, a ruthless, totalitarian alien empire, is expanding. To build a defensive buffer, Earth desperately needs an alliance with the isolated, heavily fortified planet of Kossar. There is a severe diplomatic friction point. Kossar runs entirely on brutal chattel slavery. Earth attempts to solve this with General Clause 18, a strict bureaucratic mandate demanding immediate total abolition as the price of the treaty. The man dispatched to negotiate this mandate is Ambassador John Craig, the original author of Clause 18. Yet Craig is carrying a massive, undeclared conflict of interest. Years prior, he was captured by raiders and sold into slavery on Kossar itself. He returns to Kossar holding his sanity together through sheer unconscious effort. The trauma of physical subjugation has burned away his diplomatic naivete, leaving a hardened, hyper-vigilant survivor underneath the tailored suits. The clean, theoretical ink of General Clause 18 assumes legislation alone can erase the physical reality of a serial number branded into human flesh. Craig knows firsthand that ink is powerless against the whip. Barr's text examines a closed ecosystem of subjugation. The master-slave dialectic forces both the oppressor and the oppressed into a shared psychosis, rendering the clean legislative idealism of Earth entirely useless. The ruling class of Kossar operates what political analysts term a faisant-day society. It is terminally decadent, overripe, and sustained by the artificial momentum of inherited cruelty, rather than any actual economic innovation. In a society rapidly decaying from the inside out, survival requires the complete abandonment of moral absolutes. This chart plots Barr's dual narrative. The x-axis tracks macro-political tension, stalling treaties and the approaching Plith invasion. The y-axis tracks Craig's psychology. Beginning as an idealist diplomat, he plummets into physical subjugation, before violent adaptation spikes him upward into calculated survivor. True abolition on a world like Kossar requires dismantling an entire psychological architecture. A legal framework cannot dismantle a culture engineered entirely around sadism and survival. We see the mechanics of this subjugation when examining Craig's time in the depths of Kossar's mines. The technology is deliberately antiquated, contrasting sharply with the advanced spacecraft flying overhead. The text specifies that long conventional ultrasonics are bypassed entirely. Human muscles are utilized instead because they are cheap. The High Council chooses extreme economic inefficiency on purpose. The ultimate goal of the mines is not optimized resource extraction. The goal is the absolute exhausting physical breaking of the slave class to prevent organized resistance. This environment forces a psychological alchemy. The daily brutality strips away the intellectual veneer of John Craig, forging an alternate identity he calls Smitty. Smitty does not react with panicked desperation. He operates with lethal efficiency. He commits his first act of calculated violence to secure his own survival, executing his overseer without hesitation. When an older slave named Whiteside dies of exhaustion, Craig exploits the distraction. He murders overseer Pornak, hiding the corpse in the rubble of an old cave-in to mask the assassination as an industrial accident. The mines operate as an ecosystem of engineered trauma. They successfully crush the weak, but occasionally the pressure creates an apex predator. Above ground, the suzerains of the High Council govern through a mirrored psychosis. They are hyper-aware of the violence boiling underneath them. Their ruling philosophy is archaic, tracing directly back to the despotic logic of the Roman Emperor Caligula. Their survival rests on a single axiom: let them hate me so long as they fear me.
Councilman Winther explicitly cites this principle, odorant dumi tuant, to argue against Earth's abolition clause. He exposes the structural flaw. Granting emancipation is the greatest of possible concessions. It immediately dissolves the absolute fear required to keep a vastly outnumbered ruling class alive. The suzerains are locked in an inescapable paradox. They rule through terror, and retracting that terror invites their own executions. Kossar's political architecture is a suicide pact. Maintaining the slave state guarantees a slow, terminal rot. but legislating abolition guarantees their immediate slaughter. The elite navigate this decay with absolute cynicism. This complicity is perfectly embodied by Dr. Corey, the castle's physician, who actively maintains the health of a diseased society. Corey admits he prefers patients with severe bleeding injuries over those with vague morning malaise. He maps this clinical preference directly onto Kossar itself, a civilization dying of a sickness too pervasive to cut out. Lady Morgan Sidney sits at the peak of this rot. She is a suzerain defined entirely by Gothic decadence and arbitrary power. She governs through languid cruelty, threatening incompetence with highly engineered chemical punishment drugs. Recognizing Craig's lethal competence, she tethers him to her quarters, utilizing him as a personal enforcer and psychological pet. Close proximity forces a toxic social osmosis. The cruelty of the master and the survival instincts of the captive bleed into one another. Craig learns to navigate Lady Morgan's court by mirroring her ruthless manipulations. He studies her methods, learning to wield leverage and deception with the same cold indifference as the suzerains. The elite fully understand their society is decaying. They are actively managing its terminal decline to extract the maximum amount of remaining comfort. Increased urgency. This internal stagnation is suddenly interrupted by an external ticking clock. The Plith invasion fleet is imminent. Earth's treaty organization will not defend a non-member. If Kossar falls to the Plith, Earth's military will simply sterilize the entire planet from orbit to deny the enemy a strategic base. Yet the internal trap holds firm. The Council cannot sign Clause 18. Dropping the whip to appease Earth will trigger an immediate, bloody uprising from the millions of slaves they have systematically brutalized. This fear is validated when a young slave named Pert leads a localized, violent insurrection, displaying the exact horrors the Council anticipates. The text details the frenzied reality of slave vengeance. Craig discovers Kurt standing triumphantly over the headless, mutilated body of a woman perceived as a traitor to the uprising. Earth's missionary approach of unmanaged abolition is functionally suicidal. Forcing immediate freedom will trigger a planetary bloodbath before the alien fleet even breaches the atmosphere. Witnessing the headless body, Craig realizes his own trauma and subsequent actions have permanently disqualified him from Earth's naive idealism. Looking back at the dual-axis chart, Craig's psychological state does not revert to its origin. It flatlines in a new, morally ambiguous quadrant, the pragmatic realist. He understands that erasing a brutal system without erecting a new framework creates a vacuum of power, and a vacuum of power guarantees chaos. Craig states the solution to the physician directly. You can't just abolish the master-slave relation. You have to put some other relation in its place. Moral condemnation fails without architecture. You must intentionally engineer and enforce a viable, functional power structure to replace the oppression you remove. Craig survived by integrating the trauma of the slave with the ruthless calculation of the master. Kossar must undergo this exact same ideological compromise to establish a functional society. Surviving internal rot and totalitarian threats demands severe pragmatism. You cannot simply destroy a system of oppression. You have to build something stronger and more stable to take its place.